My name is Ken Delott. I'm the county conservationist for Oconto County here. Some of you might remember me that we met at the first meeting or not, but first off, I guess I'd like to apologize for our link mix up there. Somehow the link I sent you this week disappeared on us, so we had to hurry up and send another link out. And then before I start, just a few things about Zoom, a few quick things. On the bottom left side of your screen, you've got a little microphone there and a little camera. We ask if you're not asking a question to mute your microphone. That stops any background noise from whoever's presenting. And if you got a poor Wi-Fi connection or internet connection, we have found in the past, if you turn your camera off, the video where it says stop video, it doesn't take as much Wi-Fi, and you'll still be able to see us talk, but we won't be able to see you. Your little icon turns black. So just a few tips that way. Then down in the bottom middle of the screen, you see a little chat button, it's called. At any time, you can tap on that and you can chat to the whole group. Just type a comment in there, ask a question. So while Ryan's presenting or something, if you put him in there, we'll get his attention when he's on breaks in between and let him know them questions are there. So with that, I'm going to just start quick by, we showed previously on the county website where all this information is stored, but I just want to show one more time to everyone. So the people that didn't see it the first time know, this is the Oconto County webpage. You just go up here to departments, click on that, and you'll scroll down through all the departments, and we are the Land and Water Conservation Department. Once you get to our home page, on the left side here, we already got it in the blue, the County Waterways, Aquatic Invasive Species. That'll take you to all the stuff that pertains to our lakes here. The one you're going to want to go, you can read them all. You can go into any of them. The countywide lake study is our main page for what we're talking about tonight. And on here, we have different places you can go into. Our operation strategy and plan is the first one, the countywide lake survey results, the individual lake summary reports and plans. All the lakes are listed under there. Yours is listed under there. If you want to look at any adjoining or neighborhood lakes or whatever, you can go in there and look at them. Then the next two are, or the next one is all lake summary, which is kind of a county thing, but it compares all the lakes that are done so far. The last one is the project update. That's the sheet Dale talked about at the first meeting. That shows the different steps of everything that's going on and the time periods of what's coming up or what has been done. Then down below here, you can just see individual surveys. And if you haven't taken this survey, we encourage you to still take it. It helps Ryan when he's setting up the plan for your lake. So we still encourage you to take it. Everybody in the household can take it. It's not just one per household and so on. So that's the basics of how to find this stuff on the county website. If you ever have any questions, you can email myself, Dale, Ryan, whatever. We can help you out there. So that's all I have. And in the sense of time, we're going to put Dale Moore on from UW Extension, and he's going to talk just a little bit about the program quick.
All right. That's great. All right. Thanks, Ken. Can everybody see me? Ryan, can you see me on this?
I can see it.
You can see it? Okay. Yep. Just for the benefit of those that might not have been at the first meeting, and it was 2 years ago, I just want to go through a few quick slides here about our history and how we got to this point within the study. What's really key to remember is that the lake management plan that we're going to be presenting a lot of information tonight on, that's not the end all of everything. This is a process that's going to be going on, and we want to keep that relationship with the lake, with you, and any association or district. So with that, a little bit of our history. Let's see, did I? Okay. A lot of issues at the county level can take our attention. And Ken and I were in small departments. Again, I'm Dale Moore. I work with UW Extension. And when people say, well, we've got water issues or lake issues, why doesn't the county just handle it all? Well, when we look at what the county has, we're not the unique county that, by any means, but we are a northern county that has a lot of issues and concerns and things that pull those resources within the county. We're 81 miles in length. We have over 300 lakes within the county. Oddly enough, we have 31 county supervisors, but only 3 supervisors where the majority of our inland lakes are. The county seat is located in the southwest portion of the county along the bay. Again, it's about some 70 miles from the lakes itself, other than the bay. The southern part of the county is where most of our population is year round. We deal with about 60% of our workforce every day leaves the county for jobs and they come back. So when we look at county issues, our top 3 historically has always been law enforcement, health and human services, and highway. So a lot of effort really hasn't been historically in water issues. With that said, a few years back, Ken's department, Land and Water Conservation, they do a 10-year plan. And with that, we invited a bunch of folks that had a wide variety of outdoor enthusiasts, ag, dairy farmers, waterway landowners, that sort of thing. And we sat with them through a few evenings, and they gave us a lot of their concerns and what they would like to see. The one thing that they gave us was the guiding vision that they ultimately wanted to see, and that was having the healthiest waters in Wisconsin. But the issues that they gave us were so numerous that it really led to Ken and I and basically our staff to a point of frustration. There's so much that's out there that we could actually work on, but we can't work on everything. So when Ken and I sat down, we really looked at where we could develop our efforts in the best scenarios. And these are the 3 things. We thought that if we could bring other folks in, as the statement shows, many hands make for light work, and really diversify, get it out of our offices and build a team, we could probably have some long-term impact. We also needed to get awareness because of our county seat being so far away, lack of supervisors in the Northern District, population concerns, that sort of thing, where we have a lot of seasonal folks, not year-round. We thought we could really work on that and make the water issues near that top of that priority when the county starts looking at things that they could work on. Then we also thought, well, out of 300 lakes alone, how do we just deal with the enormity and magnitude of that? So as far as making many hands as part of this project, this is just a quick list of those that are part of the lake management that we're doing right now. There are other folks involved in other aspects of water, but we got the Land and Water, Madison, the DNR biologists and DNR fisheries, scientists and staff from Stevens Point, our Lake Association districts and groups, the big over umbrella Lake Association of Oconto County Lakes and Waterways. Obviously, we have our brand new citizen advisory group that we use as a conduit to the associations from the county back and forth. That's brand new over these past years. And then, of course, the most vital is the lake volunteers collecting a lot of our data. As far as the awareness goes, a lot of our effort has been in creating that citizen advisory group to get us issues and get the information back out. I think we've done a huge service in developing that group and getting information out. We also conducted a 400 survey that we got public feedback on users of the waterway. We currently have surveys for each of the lakes. We brought a lot of the information that we were hearing back to the county departments themselves, and we asked Sheriff, Park and Rec, even Health and Human Services, what they would be willing to do to help address the issues that they feel that they could best affect within their department. We basically recorded everything that we thought we could do by department, and the county board adopted unanimously that as a guiding document for them. So just hearing the feedback and getting that document out there is giving us another venue through the county to make the lake issues a top priority within the county. We developed the website that Ken just showed you. All the information we have is not going to be thrown away or lost from week to week or month to month. It's going to be archived, and it's going to be there for people to go to. We also have email lists that we're able to communicate back and forth more than we had in the past. And then presentations. We go around the state with some presentations to DNR and also at our own county, and of which one of the big returns on that is that the county allocated $230,000 to our lake management project and lake and waterways improvements. So anyway, that has helped tremendously. Then the last of the three was developing how are we going to address the lakes? And that leads us today. Even though we had 300 lakes in the county, we thought to ourselves the best way that we could probably have the greatest impact is look at those 60 lakes that have public access, the most likely lakes that will have the transient traffic in there. And that's what started us on this journey for 2-year studies for each of the lakes. We sought out and have achieved annual grants to the DNR to help fund this. And then as we, as we develop the end products that you're going to have tonight, we are compiling it into a number of tools. The overall lake management tool that's going to be adopted locally, as well as approved by the DNR. So it gives it some teeth for locals to assist in their lake and the betterment of the lake with projects and that sort of thing. And then we also have the tool of a comprehensive data set. So once we're done with the 60 lakes, we can go back and see which lakes have the similar issues and address them in a larger clump. So it's not going to be just a file box full of documents. We are actually creating an additional document that will concisely put apples to apples, oranges to oranges with the lakes. We also are getting a stronger relationship with the local researchers, our local volunteers. And then, of course, last but not least, the citizens and the landowners around those lakes. We really want you to have as many tools as possible, because when Ryan is done with his presentation tonight, and Tammy and maybe Brenda, all from the DNR and Stevens Point, it doesn't end there. The document's going to be hopefully locally approved by your jurisdiction, as well as the DNR, but it doesn't end there. We need to keep the relationship going and to develop positive things for your lake, and that relationship is what we really want to get to through that. So really, with those three key things, we were looking to address to help answer those needs within that first effort going back a number of years. Now, switching over, the last thing we're going to talk about is that update. We wanted to get as much information as we could to the lake associations, membership, those that live around the lakes and those who care about the lakes. So we have this project update, and we try to get it out to whether it's the lake associations and the local government entities. It's about 8 pages, but it tells you everything that we're trying to do and the 6 goals that we have for the project. And it talks about each of the lakes that are being studied and when they're going to have their studies completed by. So this is just a draft on the screen, but if you go to our website that Ken showed you, I have it circled in red. That is where you would look at it, and you could give that to your neighbors to let them know which lakes are complete and what their status is. And basically, we needed this document because it was going to take 2 years to get this study done, and we could lose a lot of people in the process. So really, that's a lot of information there, but I really wanted to give you a historical idea on why we got to today, and that's just not a lake management plan that's going to end up on a shelf. We really hope that there's going to be a lot of future impact with it. So with that, if there are no questions, I think we're going to turn it back over probably to Ryan and then Tammy, I think, with the fish study.
Ryan's muted.
Sorry, thank you. This must be the first meeting of the night, right? Can everyone see my presentation up there on their screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, all right. Thanks, Ken and Dale. Thank you for your introduction. Obviously, as you can see, there's a lot of information tonight. I'm probably not going to slow up that pace here at all. So don't feel like you have to absorb everything right away. All these reports that I'll refer to, and even this recording of this presentation will all be available on the county's website. So you can watch it again at a later time, view some of those reports. Unfortunately, we have to do the Zoom format here. I like to meet in person. I get, it's obviously better feedback when you're presenting in person. And I also like to hand out some hard copies of some of these reports that I'm referring to. So it's something you can take home and study at your leisure. If you would like a hard copy, we can definitely get you one. If you just contact Ken or Dale, they can send you one. Otherwise, everything is available on the website. So again, don't be too overwhelmed. But again, we're gathered here tonight to discuss creating a lake management plan for Ucil Lake, and this has been an ongoing process here for a couple of years, as they described. So just to orient you a little bit, sometimes we get people at these planning meetings that hadn't participated in some of the earlier steps in this process. So again, we're creating lake management plans. We're doing lake studies for all the 60 plus public access lakes in the county. Process we started a few years ago. We're probably about halfway through it. The process gets some good baseline data on all the lakes. Again, data with present day methodologies and things like that can be compared apples to apples. And for a lot of these lakes, this is the first data that they've gotten. For some of these lakes, it's the first time they've been revisited in several decades. And then there are other lakes that are right in the middle of things, and that's okay too. These reports, these assessments, they incorporate any information that we could find. So if you've been through the lake planning process before, that's great. This is just an update. But for a lot of these lakes, this will be brand new. And I think for Ucil, this is well timed because I know you guys recently discovered Eurasian milfoil at the lake, and that's oftentimes what motivates this process anyway. So it's good timing for you guys. I just want to say quickly what a lake management plan is I really just think of it as a clearinghouse sort of document about your lake. There's a lot of people involved with your lake at any given time. The DNR is doing its management and surveys. You might have stocking going on or sportsmen's clubs involved in some activities on your lake. Of course, there's the lake associations that are doing what they do. And then, of course, individual property owners. And so the lake management plan is really designed to be a single document that houses basically everything we know about this lake and incorporates that information with some objectives and goals of where we would like this lake to go. And those are really, we really want the buy-in from the people who are going to be involved with that, which is you guys around the lake. And so we want you to be involved with this. We want you to pick it up and run with it, so it doesn't just end up as another document on the shelf somewhere. And again, all the lakes in the county have been or will be going through this process. So we're hoping there's some good momentum in the lake communities countywide in making sort of this sort of stuff happen. And so particularly when you have close neighbors like Westcott and things like that, lakes can really team up and work together on some of these issues. And Westcott is obviously directly linked to you. And so Westcott definitely has an interest in what Ucil's doing, being downstream from them. So but the lake management plan, it just houses all the information we know. It presents some baseline data. It's good to do this planning when you're not in crisis mode, trying to solve some sort of problem, so that we can have thoughtful, well-visioned responses. And increasingly, and I would say almost always now, a comprehensive management plan is being required for to be eligible for various resources, particularly grant funding from the state. A lot of money has been put into lake management statewide, particularly with the explosion of invasive species. And so that money really needs to be going to lakes that have a good idea of what they're doing, that they're not tunnel vision trying to solve just one particular problem or in crisis mode, but that they are approaching the management of their lake holistically and comprehensively. And so again, that's the purpose for the lake management plan. Again, it houses all the information we know, which is going to constantly be changing. So these plans need to be updated routinely. If you're doing active management in your lake, such as weed management or something like that, those updates are required a little more frequently. But at least every 10 years for lakes, they should update this with what they've learned about their lake. I think it's good to visit at least annually, update it with the previous year's activities. We have volunteers, or a lot of volunteers involved in some of this monitoring, and hopefully they will continue that work beyond this particular project. And so there should always be new information to incorporate. And so this process is started a couple of years ago when we began a 2-year lake study. And that's just to kind of gather this baseline information. These lakes are 10,000 years old, a lot of them. And so a 2-year study is really just a snapshot in time. But like I said, for a lot of these lakes, that may be all we have to go on, and not a whole lot else. So a lot of these decisions are based on the data we have. And so a key thing will be continuing to collect that data in the long run to be able to make better decisions. So the 2-year study was completed on Ucil, and we're now in this management plan development. So tonight, DNR and I'm from UW Stevens Point, and Dale and Ken from Oconto County and Extension are all here to kind of present what we know about the lake to you as the homeowners and the people that live on the lake, and then help you create an effective lake management plan that will go on file with the DNR. And then all these various agencies will know what the information exists on this lake. And in addition to that, as you'll see, what the visions are for the people who actually live there and what they would like to see. Once this plan is done, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, then it'll go to the town and the county, and like I say, various agencies to have on file and to refer to. And by various agencies, sometimes it's even something like the highway department or the parks department, things like this, that if they're working in the area and doing anything that may impact a lake. Sometimes the plan just informs them how they impact the lake, because not everyone's aware of that. Just really quick, the lake management plans are under chapter in NR 193 in the Wisconsin Code. There's a lot of required elements here for an official approved plan. Everything from the obviously physical data and hard science to what's in the watershed, how's the watershed comprised of, what's the land use, what's the phosphorus loading coming from the watershed, what sort of aquatic plants are in the lake, how those plants are changing, invasive species, shoreline habitat, and land ownership in the watershed and around the lake. Any reference to any other management plans, little modeling, which I'll show you, fisheries data, and then other public information. And so there's there's a lot that goes into this. And so what I usually propose is that we present this information for you. And then what I do is I will draft up a draft management plan. And I've got some pages here, so it's already begun. It's usually, pretty good, pretty hefty document that has various chapters for a lot of those topics I just discussed. And so it puts them in some context, really summarizes it. And then the last page down there on the right is one of the last pages from, say, the aquatic plant chapter. And you can see there where with your help, we will develop goals, objectives, and actions. And so usually what I do is I present this information to you guys. I kind of draft a version of this, and then we'll send it out to you all. We have your email addresses now from inquiring about this meeting. And so when I have that draft, probably in the next few weeks, we'll send out that draft to you all to review. And what I'd like to do is hear comments, ideas, things you like, things you don't like. If you've got a cool picture of the lake you want included, you can send that to me. You can communicate with me by email or directly call me on the phone. I'll show you my contact information. And we'll just send this draft through various iterations until we have something that your group is satisfied with. Some lake groups like to get together and this might be a limitation now given the current circumstances, but discuss it among themselves, develop some of their own goals and objectives. I will give you some, I kind of will give you some guidance on those in my draft based on what I'm seeing in the data and everything. And we can go back and forth with that as many times until you guys have something you're happy with. And at which point then we will submit it to the DNR for their approval. So I'll talk about that at the end. So what I'd like to do now is go ahead and start just summarizing and giving you all the information we have about Ucil. Some of this will be new to you guys. Some of it will make a lot of sense if you're familiar with the lake. And I'm going to start with fisheries. And we've got Tammy Paoli from the fishery biologist from DNR here tonight, who's going to tell you about the fisheries. I'm going to have her go first in case she can't stick around for the whole meeting. But I'd also wanted to add that kind of my style, if you have a question, like Ken was describing, go ahead and type it into that chat, or you can just unmute and shout it out. We can be pretty casual. I don't think we'll have too much problem with too many people yelling out questions. So questions along the way, definitely throw them out there. That's part of the process. We'd like to do is hear from you, people who actually live on the lake. So with that, take it away, Tammy.
All right, thanks, Ryan. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yep, it's up. Yep.
So thanks for joining this meeting. I have a short presentation to give on some of the latest fisheries information that we have. And I'll just introduce myself quickly. I know there are a few familiar names on this call, but several that I don't recognize are some phone numbers. So I'll be getting a list of your names and emails after this meeting from either Ryan or Ken. And what I can do is I can add you to an email list that I have for every lake. I have an email list that I have been building on. So if there's some new information or we're planning a survey, or if we did a survey and we have some information to share with you, I'll send that your way. I don't inundate you with a lot of emails. It's just, building my email contacts for future reference. And so I'll dive right into this here. So I won't spend a ton of time on this because Ryan probably will, and this is a lot of just background information on the lake, but Ucil Lake, or Ucil Lake, I guess is the correct pronunciation, I was hoping Arlen Liebel would be on the call because I know he has a place here on this lake. And so he's very, very aware of this lake. And maybe he is, maybe he's one of those phone numbers there. I'm not sure. But so the lake is 78 acres. And this is important as far as our fisheries survey plans go. So typically, in a lot of cases, when a lake is 100 acres or less, it doesn't rise to our typical 10-year rotation, or in some cases 4 or 5 year rotation that we have on some of our largest lakes that are 1,000 acres and larger typically get surveyed every 4 or 5 years. But lakes that have 100 acres or more plus public access are typically on like an 8 or 10 year rotation. But this lake fell just below 100, but we still do have some survey data, thankfully, and it is on a rotation. I do plan to keep it on a rotation despite this, but it doesn't have it's not on a spring netting rotation. It's only on what we call a spring electrofishing survey rotation, which is a one-night electrofishing survey, mostly targeting bass and panfish. And I'll talk a little bit more later on about netting this lake and some plans that we're hoping to fit in the future. So just have some other stats about the lake here. The lake follows the general inland fishing regulations. There's no special regulations on the lake, which is the case for most of the lakes in my area. So I cover Oconto County, south of Highway 64 inland, and then also Green Bay waters. My counterpart, the fisheries biologist, also out of the Peshtigo office, Chip Long, he covers inland Oconto County, north of Highway 64, and Marinette County inland. So that's kind of how we split up the duties. So I don't have quite as much of Oconto County as he does, but I do have that southern half of the county. Just wanted to give you an idea of the stocking history on the lake. Much like many of the smaller lakes in our area, there's not an extensive stocking history, which is a good thing. That typically means they're doing pretty well on their own. They often don't need a lot of management, hands-on stocking types of things. So, you can see from this list, there were some northern pike that were stocked in the 70s and 80s for a couple of years. Some largemouth bass were stocked, and that was it. There hasn't been anything since the late 80s, and which is what we as fish managers like to see generally. It means the lake is probably doing pretty good on its own. The predators are obviously reproducing on their own, and the panfish are doing well also. So that's a good thing. We did do a survey. Our last survey that we did on the lake was in 2014, and this was a nighttime electrofishing survey. The picture shows what the boat looks like in the daytime, just so that you can actually see it. But we do these surveys at nighttime because that's when the fish are moving into shore to feed. And so the boat is really most effective in 5 feet of water or less. And so it goes along the shoreline of the lake, as close to shore as we can get, and puts a temporary electrical charge into the water. And then there are 2 dippers up front. These dippers are holding big nets because this was during a sturgeon survey on the Menominee River, but our nets are a bit smaller when we would be doing inland stuff with smaller mesh. And they would be dipping fish as they are temporarily stunned and putting them in the tank that you see in the middle of the boat. And then we stop every so often and work up the fish, measure them, and take any other information that we would. So on the evening of 2014, we did a 2-mile survey of the shoreline. We did not do the entire shoreline. We did not get too far into the second lobe of the lake. And this survey was just mainly to get an idea of our bass and panfish population, what we call our SC2 survey. I remember this night very, very distinctly. And those of you who live on the lake can probably recall or probably can agree that there are certain times of the year that the mosquitoes are absolutely horrendous on that lake. We got out of the vehicle, and of course it's dusk, so the worst time when mosquitoes would be at their worst, and I've never seen anything like it in my life. Thankfully, the fisheries technician with us had an entire box of head nets in his vehicle for us to each have one. So he was used to dealing with some of these horrible mosquito sites. But we got our head nets on, we got the boat in the water, and once we got going, then of course the mosquitoes died down. But I'll always remember standing at that boat landing, getting out of that vehicle and thinking, oh my Lord, how are we gonna survive this? The last electrofishing survey we did was in 2006. So I mentioned these rotations, and even though this is under that 100-acre mark, it still is under a 10-year rotation for a spring electrofishing survey. Now, it should have came up in 2016, but I bumped it ahead a couple of years earlier because at the time, Wisconsin was going through, and we still are in the middle of looking at our panfish regulations on several lakes. And so we needed some up-to-date information on panfish for some of our lakes to decide if we wanted to put it into one of the special regulation categories for panfish. So in some lakes, there's limited panfish regulations. It might be five bluegill, 5 crappie, there's varying different regulations that are sort of experimental for a handful of years, and those will be evaluated and decided if which ones work the best. So wanted to get some up-to-date information to see if this lake would fit into that panfish study. And that's why we bumped it ahead a couple of years early. What we found is that we didn't have anything that rose to a concern that prompted us to want to put it in this study and adjust the panfish regulations based on that survey. So it wasn't added. And so obviously it still falls into the statewide regulations. So the results of that survey were we caught 120 fish of 7 species. Largemouth bass were most abundant, and this is fairly common in a lot of these bass bluegill lakes that we have in the area. And this survey is designed to target bass and bluegill particularly, but yellow perch and bluegill were common. We also caught green sunfish, pumpkin seed, yellow bullhead, and brook silverside, which I'll show you a slide of those here shortly. Brook silverside are a neat species of fish. They're a native fish. It's a forage fish that spends most of its life near the water surface. And it has this upturned mouth here to kind of pull prey items off of the surface of the water. And so it's a really good species of fish for other fish to eat. And Ucil Lake is one of the few lakes in my area where brook silverside are pretty abundant. I was trying to look up some more history and background into them, and they are native to many lakes in the area, and I just don't know. I'm not really sure why they're doing so well in the lake. There have some reports that I was reading, some literature suggested that they do well in very clear, clean water. So that's a good sign. And so we saw just thousands of these along the surface as we were shocking along that night. Next, I'll show you some graphs on our bluegill length frequency. So this is what we were really trying to find out. We were trying to find out, is there a problem with bluegill size in the lake? And so when we collected our bluegill, this is how they fall out in the length bins. And as you can see, the 6-inch bluegill were the most abundant. Our sample size isn't huge, but again, we only shocked 2 miles of the lake just to get some fish and get an idea of what was out there. But we did catch a few 7-inch bluegill as well. And so this is pretty typical of what we would see in many lakes, but what we were happy to see is that we weren't just seeing a lot of 2, 3, and 4-inch bluegill. There are some catchable size bluegill in the lake. Another thing that we were focused on are largemouth bass. And this shows the length frequency of largemouth bass that we caught. I mentioned they were the most abundant fish that we captured, which again is common in these spring electrofishing surveys. Now, one thing we did see was we only had a handful of fish that would be considered legal size, as you can see here on this far end of the graph. A lot of fish, a lot of bass on the smaller side of things. A moderate density, so when we do our surveys, then we can calculate into number per mile to compare to other lakes. And this isn't a high density, it'd be considered, medium density of bass. If this were a high density of bass, then it might be more cause for concern. We might be thinking more about talking about a regulation change, maybe a no minimum size for bass to help encourage people to harvest them. But at the time, we're not concerned that we necessarily need to go that route. And the fact that our bluegill were doing so well also kind of suggested maybe we don't want to tinker with our predator population, because having a high density of predators helps to pick out a lot of the small panfish and reduces the chances that you would have a stunted population. So, if people are more interested in managing the fish for catchable legal sized bass or even trophy bass, then we certainly might consider a regulation change here. One of the things that was really neat to see on the lake, and this is not something that we typically see on small inland lakes, was a good number of yellow perch. And so we were really happy to see that we were getting good numbers of 5, 6, and 7-inch perch in the lake. Now there was no stocking in the database, so I'm not aware of any stocking that occurred privately. Sometimes lake associations purchase yellow perch and stock them, and then we see a big number for a year or two, and then they go back down to their normal numbers. But I have to assume these are hopefully naturally reproduced fish that are doing really well in the lake, which again is kind of surprising given the smaller size of the lake, but also adds a nice panfish opportunity besides our bluegill in the lake too. So in conclusion, we found that Ucil Lake has a moderate density of largemouth bass. Size structure of bass is poor. If somebody called me and asked me where should I go to catch some bass that I want to keep and take home for dinner, I would not send them to this lake because there's not very many legal size bass. We did not take aging structures during this survey, and I wish we would in hindsight, because that would help to tell us if the growth of bass was slow, average, or fast. I have a feeling it's probably average just because of the moderate density and other lakes that we've seen similar numbers and sizes on. Our bluegill and yellow perch size structure is good, and so that's also really good news given this is a small lake. And part of me thinks that maybe the size structure is good simply because the access is not that great. It's very possible that there's just not a lot of fishing pressure out there other than some of the locals. I'm not really sure how it is in the winter time. I have been out on the access road late spring, and it's not plowed. At least it wasn't that year. So I have a feeling that there's not a ton of ice fishing that goes on other than maybe the folks that live around the lake itself. So it doesn't get a lot of fishing pressure. There have been some inquiries in the past about our northern pike population on the lake. Now, you noticed I didn't have any graphs or numbers about northern pike in that survey, and that's because the survey really was designed to capture bass and bluegill. And pike are best captured during a spring ice out netting survey when they're spawning and they're in the shallows. So I had folks ask me or suggest some changes to the regulation for pike. And I said, well, we're not going to dive into a regulation change until we need some current information before we know if it's even needed. So I said, you know what, it's been so long since a netting survey had been done. In fact, it might have been something might have been done in the 70s. I don't know. I'd have to look back in the files, but I hoped to net it in the spring of 2018. That was the same year we had O'Connell Falls Pond on our rotation, and the timing of the ice out didn't work out. I was hoping to do it in 2019 then. We were doing some netting on Green Bay that spring, and that ice out timing didn't work either. Obviously 2020 was a bust. We didn't do any ice out surveys, but I haven't given up on it. And so I have it on my to-do list, hopefully for this spring for 2021. We also have Boulder Lake on our to-do list, which has a slightly higher priority than this lake, given its size and the fact that it's in the ceded territory. But if the ice out doesn't land at the exact same time, and because we only have one crew, so we can't do two lakes at the same exact time. If the ice out doesn't happen at the same time, then that would allow us to get in here, get some nets in the water. We wouldn't necessarily have to be in there for 2 weeks, maybe just 1 week, just to get an idea of what's going on, get some pike measured and age structures to see if they're slow growing or fast or average, and go from there. And then we could maybe think about if any pike regulations need to be adjusted. But that's something, to think about ahead in the future. So with that, that is my last slide. Ryan, do you want to open it up to questions now or wait until after everything's done, or what would you prefer?
Hey, Tammy, this is Ken. We do have a couple comments in the chat. If you want me to just read them to you, then
Sure,
you can answer.
yeah, they don't come up. I guess I'd have to stop sharing for the comment thing to show up.
One comment just was local fishermen are pleased with the amount of pike caught and released in the past 2 years. That was just a comment.
Oh,
Then
okay, that's good to hear.
Then a question before that: what steps do we take to get the lake stocked like Kelly Lake? Can the association itself stock the lake? And then what about crappie?
Sure. So yes, the association could stock fish. And so how it worked for Kelly Lake is they just contacted me and said, we're thinking of stocking. They've stocked some crappie in the past and also yellow perch. We're thinking of stocking these panfish. What do you think? And I said, sure. I mean, and I don't see any harm in stocking panfish generally, as long as you're not overstocking. And so we would kind of come up with some numbers that would make sense in sizes of fish, and then it would be up to the Lake Association to purchase them from a private hatchery. There would be a stocking permit that you'd have to fill out. It's free. It just basically you fill out your name, address, where you're getting the fish from, which hatchery, how many, what species, and that sort of thing, and I approve it. So it's certainly something that, unless you're going to stock something totally off the wall or some crazy high numbers of something, that would likely get approved. So it's certainly something that if the Lake Association was interested in trying to put some crappie in there and see how they did, that's perfectly acceptable. We could easily do that, or yellow perch, which seem to already be doing good. I guess I would be a little hesitant to add more perch since they already seem to be doing good. You might be messing with Mother Nature if you put too many in there, but hard to say. Maybe if you throw a few in, it might be a better thing too.
Okay, thanks, Tammy. We also had, did you answer about crappie? I'm guessing crappie shows up better with the netting.
Yeah, so we did not catch any crappie in this survey. Not to say they're not in the lake, but they're likely at a pretty low density that we just didn't see any during this survey. And we might see that, we would likely see them during a spring netting survey, if we can pull it off anytime soon.
Okay. Cool. Any other questions regarding the fishery for Tammy? Okay, one other thing I saw, and maybe Brenda, you can help us with this, and or Tammy. I know this too, that the max depth for the lake is reported to be 13, but there is a much deeper hole up on that northwest end of the lake. Do we know why it's reported as an average or a max depth of 13? And I also know the sampling point is not over that hole in the northwest end of the lake either.
Yeah, I'm not sure why it says 13. I can call down to our central office and have them change that. When we were out there, we updated the bathymetry. This is Brenda Nordine, by the way, lake biologist. And we found a hole that had a max depth of 30 feet. So we know it's more than 13, and there were quite a few coordinates that we had that were around 20, 25, and up to 30 feet. So
Okay.
That makes sense. I'm wondering if so this lake also, those of you who have been around it for long probably know this better than I do, but it's also known as Veil Lake, V-E-I-L. So as I'm going through the files at the office, there was a lot of references to Veil Lake, and I'm wondering if one lobe of the lake was named, if there was used to be considered two separate lakes, and Veil Lake was the one that had the 13-foot max depth, but it's actually the entire lobe. I'm not sure, but there's a very crude hand-drawn map that shows some water depths that I have at the office. And most of these lakes, we have pretty decent maps out there, but for whatever reason, for Ucil Lake, there's no great map that's out there. And so maybe that's where some of this discrepancy in the depth comes into play, because maybe the 13-foot refers to the one lobe of the lake. I don't know.
Sure. I've heard, I swear I've seen something like that in the past. I guess Brenda, makes me wonder about, profiles and stuff. If, we're doing profiles at a 13-foot deep spot versus a 30-foot deep spot, I could, we might be missing some information there. I don't know. Because I did the profiles at the sample point, which is just off that island.
the 13-foot spot.
Yeah.
Yeah, it may not hurt to grab a couple at the 30-foot spot on it's like it's a northern lobe there.
Yeah.
And just to see if anyone is willing to grab a couple.
Yeah.
Or available, I guess.
Obviously, if they start doing something with the, if they ever went down a chemical road, that would be more important.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, thanks, Tammy. If no one has any other questions for her, I will continue with some of this other stuff we've got here. Okay. Everyone see my lake aging process thing there?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it's up. Yep.
Again, just shout out questions to me or throw them up in the chat. That's working pretty effectively. I've got a couple people monitoring it for us. So throw those questions out there. So I'm basically, other than the fishery data, which was collected back in 2014, this will be data that basically summarizes the past 2 years, and then we'll refer to anything else we know. I just want to give you some quick background about lakes and understanding lakes, because the biggest thing when we're doing developing a management plan and developing these visions of what we want our lake to be like, we have to have realistic expectations for those lakes. So we're not gonna change a lake into a swimming pool, or these lakes have been around for thousands of years. They're doing exactly what they're supposed to do. They're responding to the inputs in their environment, and we have developed ways to kind of nudge them in one way or the other, but it's hard to make very significant changes, and those changes often occur over decades. And so this diagram here just shows that lakes go through a natural aging process. When these were first created after the last glaciation, they would have been very young lakes with sandy, hard bottoms, lot fewer plants, lot fewer fish, less wildlife in general, clear water, more like the swimming pool. But because these lakes are low points in the landscape, naturally things pour into them over time. And just like your moat at the beach around your sandcastle, it's been going on for thousands of years, and it will continue for thousands of years beyond that. And these lakes really go in one direction. And if you give them enough time, and barring any other major geologic events, these lakes will eventually fill up and become marshes and eventually land someday. And so different lakes, depending on the inputs that are affecting them, go through this aging process, or they find themselves at different places in the aging process. And what we do as humans on the landscape usually tends to have the effect of speeding this process up. As erosion and nutrients go into that lake, it wants to advance to a wetland much quicker. And so, like I said, usually what we do is we try to find ways to kind of slow this process down and maybe influence a little bit, but have to recognize that we're never going to go back to that lake that we had 10,000 years ago. And so just having realistic expectations and appreciating your lake for what it is a big part of that. All right. Our lake obviously is comprised of water, and so the biggest thing in understanding how our lake works is knowing where this water is coming from and where it's going. The basic water cycles that land or rain falls on the surface of the earth. A lot of that, particularly during a storm event, will run across the surface, across the land surface, downhill to the nearest water body. And some will have the opportunity to infiltrate into the soil and eventually down into the water table, which is also, water table is also making its way in a much slower pace to water bodies as well. Eventually those waters drain on out to the Green Bay and the ocean. And so the more activity, the more impervious surface, the more development that we have on the surface increases runoff, and it gives that water less chance to infiltrate into the groundwater. And so that runoff moves much quicker, carries a lot of things with it. So in a general theme of lake management really involves trying to encourage water to infiltrate, go into that reserve account in the water table and feed that lake slowly, and it also gets filtered and cleaned out that way. And so that's the basic process. So we'll spend a lot of time working at where's our water coming and where's it going. So here's Ucil, what shapes a lake's character? Why is Ucil different than Kelly, which is different than Maiden? These lakes are only, a few miles apart from each other, but they can all behave very differently. Part of it has to do with the age of the lake, like I just discussed. And a lot of it has to do with lake type. So we have seepage lakes and drainage lakes, which Ucil is, and different types of lakes. So water typically moves through a drainage lake much quicker than a seepage lake, and has a lot more surface water going through it than a seepage lake might. The geology of the area affects the types of lake. It affects the minerals that are in the lake water. The topography, dictates the watershed of a lake and what lies in that watershed. We have seasonal changes to the lake, particularly here in Wisconsin. Our lakes are frozen several months of the year, and that has an effect ecologically on the lake. You work on lakes in Georgia and Florida, they don't freeze. So we have some very different dynamics occurring on lakes here based on our seasons and our latitude. Land use within the watershed, whether that be residential, farming, industrial, recreational, whatever, all those various types of land uses have their relative impact on the lake. And then nearshore activities are also very important. There's no question that a farm down the road is impacting your lake, but the closer you get to a lake and right to the water surface, the greater the potential for impact. And so obviously something happening right on the lake's edge versus something happening a mile away have different degrees of impact on that lake, for good or bad. So here's our this was a new contour map that Brenda referred to that the DNR did when they were out doing their shoreline and plant surveys. And you can see obviously that hole up there, which is obviously much deeper than 13 feet. I have the 13 feet in there just because that's what's officially reported, but we should look into getting that addressed or changed or modified, what have you. Again, if that could have some impact, if we find out that that deep hole is deep enough to stratify, your lake is classified differently in terms of its phosphorus tolerance and things like that, which I'll talk about. So here's a new map. This is available. It's in the reports online and things like that. I think one lake even we gave a copy of this too, and they printed a bunch out and laminated them and handed them out so people would have a new map. Most of these lakes haven't been mapped in over 50 years, and some things have changed, some things haven't. This is obviously done now with sonar, so it's a much more continuous scan of the bottom than the kind of connect the dots method they used to use to map these lakes. Real quick, I wanted to mention the survey. We only had a handful of responses to the survey. If you aren't aware, there's an online survey that anyone that uses or is interested in the lake can take. It has various questions about your perceptions of the lake, how you use the lake, what kind of things you see needing changed in the lake or kept the same. That helps to justify some of the and quantifies the people's perceptions and then helps to justify some of the objectives and goals in the plan. So I'm definitely using the information we've collected in our discussion here tonight. But if you haven't taken the survey, I think it was Ken set out another link to it recently with the invite for this meeting, but it's available on the county website, and we'll be working on this plan for weeks to come. So still definitely have an opportunity to take that. Make sure your neighbor takes it. Anyone that's interested in the lake or has an opinion about the lake, it helps to kind of gather people's perspectives, and it's really good for people who weren't able to attend this meeting, for example, to have their 2 cents as well. So from the handful of responses I did get, I'm not going to show any real graphs or anything from the survey, just because there wasn't enough to really show anything significant, but I have a couple here just from comments. One of the questions is, what do you value most about the lake? The people around the lake, the serenity, and the fishing. And so again, these questions, it sounds like a basic question, but these questions, the answers to these questions are very important in guiding the vision of the lake. It needs to be the choices we make for the lake need to be consistent with how people appreciate this lake. And then another question, what in your opinion, what are the biggest impacts to Ucil Lake? Invasive species, and someone suggested maybe also septic systems. There's no question septic systems have an impact. That can be an entire study in and of itself. But remember, septic, even a brand new, perfectly functioning septic system is still releasing phosphorus, nitrogen, things like that to the water. And so just our presence and our use of those facilities around the lake definitely have an impact. But it varies from lake to lake. And then, in your opinion, what should be done to improve Ucil Lake? Someone suggested that more education, and that's part of why we're here tonight. There's also some, which I normally, again, would hand out if we were in person, but there are a couple of good reports on Ucil now that we've published, one that includes all this data, and then there's also a county-wide report, which kind of puts all the lakes in perspective with each other. So you can see how your phosphorus concentration compares to Underwood's or to Kelly or something like that. I can tell you a number, but sometimes it's neat to see where you fall compared to other lakes you know of. There's a lot of sediment in the lake. I talked a little bit about that with the aging process. The muck and sediment into the lake is something, it's natural. It's something that happens quicker with development and can be slowed down with shoreline restorations and different activities in the watershed. But inevitably it's kind of a one-way street. And so sediment of the lake just is what it is. It's not bad for the lake. It's part of its aging process. And it can be a nuisance, I know, for some people. And then catch and release the large crappies was another comment we had. So again, I'm going to show you some measurements here. This is temperature measured in the lake, and again, this was measured at a I think we found a 15-foot deep spot there in the southern half of the lake. But we haven't done monitoring in that deep hole due to that discrepancy there. But basically, as you would expect for a 15-foot deep lake, this shows relatively consistent temperature with depth. So each of the surface of the lake would be at the top of this graph, and depth is going down. And then those are different each of those different colored lines is a different event, a different time of year that we were there. And so you can see that at the surface, the temperature is relative to the season, and then it changes by maybe 5 degrees or so with depth, but we would call that still pretty relatively uniform temperature change with depth. So what that shows us is that this is just a well-mixed lake. It does not stratify, and it's a shallow lake. By classification. So we also measure water clarity, which is, you can see here, a pretty simple activity with the Secchi disc. We might have some volunteers on tonight that do this and help out with this. This equipment is available and the training's available. It's very easy. And basically we just lower that disc in until you can't see it anymore. And that tells us how far light penetrates into the lake. So, the changes in light penetration can be affected by, color, maybe tannins from wetlands, sediment stirred up in the water column, algae blooms, things like that. And so, again, a measurement or two here or there doesn't really tell us much, but if you get a good record, long-term record of these water clarity measurements, it's a good, inexpensive, and easy way to monitor the lake and detect any changes that might be occurring. Again, your lake clarity is probably different on a weekend than it is on a Wednesday midweek or something, just due to the activity on the lake. And so these results vary, but what's important is the long-term trend on these things. And so here's the water clarity data we were able to gather for Ucil. There's a handful of measurements back in the late 80s, a couple in the mid 70s, another handful in the mid 2000s there, and then And then our data is just on the edge of the chart there, 2018, 2019. And if you plot a trend line over those various depths there, it would suggest that the water clarity is increasing in Ucil. But I would also say that this is very limited data. It's nice to have some going back a few years, but this is just a handful of samples, and based on the amount of variation you can experience seasonally and even day of the week. I wouldn't hang my hat on this trend, but what it does show overall is that it would suggest that it's, if nothing else, it seems to be a relatively stable water clarity. In the upper left there, that just kind of shows the averages for months in this study compared to averages historically, and they are they're I would say they're similar, which is also suggestive of a stable system. Dissolved oxygen is another thing we routinely measure. This is obviously important for the fish in the water, and decaying plants, decaying algae blooms, things like that can impact the dissolved oxygen in a lake, and particularly with shallow lakes. It can get depleted so much that you end up with fish kills or something in the wintertime. If there's not enough dissolved oxygen in that system going into winter, you can lose it. And so it's also, it's also something we measure when we go out. And again, here's another profile, lowering the instrument in from the surface down with depth. We can see that the oxygen concentration is relatively stable with depth. It stays pretty similar. And if you look at our deepest profile there with April, it's almost exactly 12 parts per million all the way down. And then as you hit that sediment in the bottom, that drops off. And so where these are dropping off is probably a function of slightly different places where the profile was done. Obviously in the September, the yellow sample there, they were only at a location that was 8 feet deep, as deep as they got that profile. But up until then, it was a uniform depth. But this is why I'd be curious to go to the deep hole there on the northwest end to see if you do get any stratification in that hole. Nutrients is a big thing we look at in terms of the water samples we take. The biggest ones we're looking at are phosphorus and nitrogen. You hear this a lot when we talk about lakes, particularly the phosphorus, and mainly is because that's what grows plants and algae. And not most, but a lot of lakes struggle with excessive plant growth, excessive algae blooms, and that's typically due to an excess of nutrient in the water. And you'll see below that there are various sources of phosphorus in the world. There's natural sources such as the phosphorus that's bound up in bottom sediments that can be resuspended by motors and things like that. There are natural sources of phosphorus, so wetlands that act like a big sponge. When they drain, they release a bunch of phosphorus. When plants or animals die off in the lake, that phosphorus is released to the system as that decays. And then phosphorus binds to soil particles very well. And so anytime we get erosion or runoff from storm events or from impervious surfaces, those are big inputs of phosphorus. And then on the right side, you can see where the other sources of phosphorus are erosion, runoff, lawn clippings, fertilizers, wastewaters, which would be our septic systems, things like that. And so there's a lot of sources of phosphorus coming into the system, which is a good thing naturally, because we need phosphorus in that system for things to grow and to have a healthy system in place. But there's only those handful of things on the right there that we have any control over. And so that's why shoreline owners are harped on a lot about about how they're managing their property or their septic systems or things like that. It's not necessarily because they're the biggest culprits. It's because those are the only sources of phosphorus that we can do anything about. So if we determine that you need less nutrient in the system, we've only got a couple of things to work with. Let's see, I just wanted to check the chat. Okay. So here's our limited, again, phosphorus data. We've got a handful of samples from back in the 70s when they were doing a lot of widespread sampling around the state. Again, just trying to get some baseline information on the lakes. And then we can see nothing was really looked at here in Ucil until this project started back in 2018. And so again, if you were to plot a trend between those few samples from the 70s, it would suggest our phosphorus concentration is going up. It'd be hard to say that for sure without a lot of ongoing monitoring. And so, you know, if you are helping to volunteer with the sampling or are interested in doing that, that's something you can continue to do well beyond this project and continue to develop that data set so that you can really start to tease out some better trends going forward. You know, it'd be neat to see this 10 years from now and see what the data tells us based on our little snapshot here that we got. But at least we have this now. This shows phosphorus concentrations during this study, maxing out around 15, which is a good healthy number for a lake like this. You know, 30, or and in this case for a shallow drainage lake, 40 parts per million. That red line on the top is kind of a threshold for when phosphorus really starts becoming a problem in the lake. And based on the samples that we've taken, it still looks pretty good. The green dots are chlorophyll, and so that's kind of an indirect measurement of algae blooms in the system. A good rule of thumb is for those to be below 6. So again, those are very good numbers. We did have one sample for whatever reason up there above 6. Maybe that was just a well-timed sample with an algae bloom. But in general, all those numbers look pretty good. But again, when I see a graph like this, first thing I want to see is more data. So pollutants, another thing we sample for, things like potassium, chloride, sodium. These are kind of tracer chemicals that in and of themselves in modest concentrations, they're not really harmful to the lake, but they're not things that would show up in the lake naturally. So if we see elevated concentrations of these things, then we know that we're getting an impact, pretty significant impact from things like road salts, farm runoff, septic systems, things like that. All these concentrations were low, which again is good news. So our watershed is if you're not familiar with the term, is the area of land that is draining to your lake. So when a drop of rain hits the ground, the topography determines which way that drop goes, whether it be running across the surface of the lake or through the soil beneath. That drop of water is making its way in whatever path is least resistant to the nearest water body. And so that area that drains to the lake is your watershed. And what's happening on the land in that watershed has a huge impact on the lake itself. And so this is the delineation of the watershed here in the white dashed line. And so this is based on looking at topography and aerial photography and digital elevation models and things like that. We're able to determine this, and it's very helpful because if you do realize that if things like nutrients are a problem in your system, looking at the land use and what area of land is impacting your lake is important to know if you need to make changes. And so the land use in yellow there up across those fields is agriculture. The dark green is just wooded land. The light blue is wetland, some things like that. And so we've got our watershed there And in that watershed, it's comprised of almost 40% forest, 17% agriculture, a similar amount is the lake itself. About 8% of that would be considered developed or residential. And so that's how our land use is divvied up. The pie chart on the right there is the results of modeling that land use and those slopes and those soil types to examine where the phosphorus inputs are coming from. It's called a WILMS model that we use. And based on this land use, it would suggest that 62% of your phosphorus inputs are coming from cropland. And you know, but you can also see 16% is coming from forest. So any type of land use has exports phosphorus, just with the natural weathering that goes on. But as we all know, farming can be a lot larger impact that we're seeing here. But like I said, we're not seeing significant nutrient issues in this lake right now. Habitat, shoreline and near shore. This is another component of the lake study and of the lake management plan. And so there's a kind of a recent methodology that's used to survey the habitat around the lake. And what that allows us to do is to go in the future and survey it again and look for change. And so we can measure change over time, because we all have different perceptions or different memories about how things might be changing. But hard data kind of puts it in the archive, puts it in the record. And so we know what we're comparing to. And so shorelines are important because it's a very sensitive part of the lake. It's where we all want to be. That's why we have houses on the lake shore. But that's where most of the action takes place, whether it be you know, fish spawning or reptiles or erosion or what have you. The shoreline is really the most sensitive part. And we'll talk a little bit about restoration and how you can manage your shoreline. But I like to throw up pictures here. The two pictures on the bottom are both photos of shoreline restoration projects that have occurred. And so I just like people to see that you can make improvements to your shoreline that significantly improve the health of the lake, and have it look still very aesthetically pleasing. These are all using native plants and flowers, and sometimes you can have a landscaper to even design this for you, and so you can maintain your view of the lake and kind of show off a nice yard at the same time. So just be aware that there's a lot of possibilities there to think about. So just to orient you on the shoreline here, we've got our terrestrial area on the far left, which is our land, and then where the water starts. And beyond that, we have emergent and floating plants and submerged plants. And then at some point you get out to a depth where plants don't grow anymore. And that's usually determined by the water clarity. So how far plants need light to grow. And so depending on how clear your water is will have an impact on how far plants can grow. And again, you know, fish and wildlife and things, they like this plant area. There's actually not a whole lot that goes on out in that empty part, in that deep hole area. All the action is here in the littoral zone. And in fact, 90% of all lake life spends at least part of its life cycle dependent on that shoreland area, on that shallow water. And so that's why it's such a sensitive and important spot to maintain a healthy lake. Just wanted to throw this out here too, when we're talking about shoreline buffers, if you will, and having healthy shorelines with good habitat. This is based on a bunch of studies that were put together looking at what's required, what kind of shoreline buffer is required for various objectives. So if you're looking to control nutrient problems, you know, studies show a 13 to 140 foot buffer is important. Stormwater runoff starts at a 50-foot buffer. Fecal bacteria starts at 76 feet. up to 300, sediment control anywhere from 10 to 400 feet. And so there's a big range on these things because it depends on the topography of the site, whether you're on a hill or not. It depends on the soil types. Sometimes it depends on something as simple as which direction it faces, what's the aspect of that shoreline property. And so there is a big range here. My point is that the NR 115, the shoreline buffer, the shoreline zoning that is in place for lakes across Wisconsin requires a 35-foot buffer of some sort of unmowed plants. So similar to those pictures I was showing you there before. And you can see here that requirement, that 35 feet, really only scratches the surface of what we're trying to accomplish. So the more, the better. But I would also say, that being said, 5 feet is better than nothing too. So it's all what you feel like you can contribute to that. Again, another photo on the upper left there of a restoration project, and here's the zoning ordinance in R115 that applies to these lakes, and it's been around since the 1960s. So this is something that this isn't a new agenda. It's not new science. This is something we understood about lakes half a century ago, that we put it into law back then. Now, it's not really enforced, and a lot of people don't really understand it, and it can get very technical, the ordinance. But what I like is that picture on the right there, which just kind of shows you the intent of the ordinance, is that we have our upland residential area, and then we have this buffer zone that includes both plants on land and in the water for not only habitat, but for those water quality properties and something like that. The ordinance allows for access to the lake. It allows for a dock and clearing around that dock, but really trying to just leave as much of that in unmowed vegetation as you can. And so here's the results of the shoreline survey we did. Again, this is a standard part of the comprehensive management plan, and again, the intent is to monitor change over time. So when this survey was done, you can take a little bit of time to digest this, but basically the inner line, red and black line, is vegetation, whether it be disturbed shoreline or unmowed vegetation. The line on the outside is tree canopy. And so black is a present tree canopy, and white is canopies absent. The diamonds are docks that were in place at the time. We also have things like riprap and seawall mapped on there, and any non-conforming buildings such as boathouses or things like that. And so, if in your plan you decide to make improvements, or if homeowners decide to restore some shoreline, this can be, we can see how things have changed over time in the future. Based on this survey, about 25% of the shoreline would be considered disturbed. So you do have a lot of natural shoreline, which is doing, and I'm guessing that's national forest or something there. So that's really doing your lake a favor. But of the 12,000 feet or so of shoreline that were surveyed, there were 47 lots on that shoreline at the time, and about 3,000 feet of that was disturbed in some way, primarily mowed lawn, but also artificial beach, things like that, and 27 piers. Coarse woody habitat in the bottom of that list is exactly that. It's basically logs and large sticks in the shallow water near shore. Again, that's a really important part of habitat for not only fish, but a variety of wildlife, and really essential to not just having undisturbed shoreline, but having that structure in the shallow water. And so based on based on the survey, we counted about 27 logs per mile. And just for reference, we're looking for, a healthy lake would be something closer to 250 logs per mile. Based on this, things like fish sticks, tree drops, things like that would definitely be of benefit to this lake. Just another example of a restoration project there. And just a note about native plants, unmowed vegetation in terms of habitat doesn't include daffodils or things like that. Native plants are really what are important. They're extremely deep rooted, which prevents erosion, and also reaches down into the water, into the groundwater and in the shallow water in the lake, and extracts those nutrients that are making its way to the lake. On top of the ground, native plants are really designed for this environment. So they really act like a silt fence. They hold their own against stormwater runoff and snow melt and things like that. And for reference, in the red square there on the far left is Kentucky bluegrass. So that's your mowed lawn. And those are actual measurements there. And so it gives you a perspective on the different potential there. Other ways to reduce runoff and increase infiltration, as I said, are rain gardens, retention basins, rain catchment, rain barrels, where you collect the water running off your roof and then use it later at dry times to water plants, having a meandered pathway to the lake. And then something Ken at Land Conservation works on is best management practices with producers in the watersheds. And highway departments in terms of how their highways are drained. Used to, when we put a highway in, we directed all the runoff to the closest lake. That was the best thing to do with it. We've learned a lot since then. Highway departments are becoming a lot more sophisticated in this and learning how to manage that runoff in better ways. So these are just all ideas of things that can have a pretty big impact on your lake, particularly when excessive plants or algae are an issue. Aquatic plants is another thing we look at. So aquatic plants, again, they're important. They can be a nuisance a lot of times, but a good, healthy, robust plant community is great habitat. It's great food, and it's great for water quality. It's not as good for swimming or motorboating, but other than that, it's important to have. And so we have ways of surveying the plants in the lake that, again, we can reproduce this survey in the future and really monitor change over time. So you'll see here, there's a grid, all these points that the DNR creates across the lake. Each one of these points has a GPS coordinate. And so the survey is done by navigating to that point, and then once there, we drop a rake down. It's kind of a modified rake, but I've seen people use regular garden rakes as well. And we pull it up and we see what plants are on that rake. We see how abundant the plant material is on that lake or on that rake. Did just a few sprigs come up? Did it come up just heaping full? And then we identify all the different species on that lake, and then we're able to map that on this map. And I've always said someone who knows their aquatic plants really well could probably tell you more about a lake than I can with all my water samples, just based on the assemblage of species that exist in a lake, and even more importantly, how that assemblage is changing over time. So again, a good survey to have on record and see how it changes, particularly when you've got, when you may be developing issues with something like milfoil or something. So one of the things we look at is rake fullness. Again, that's how much just bulk plant material comes up on the rake. If it's just a few sprigs, it gets a 1. If it's a 3, or if it's a bunch, it gets a 3. And so you can see there when we map that out on the lake, we can see all our red 3s where there's much more abundant plants, and then our greens where there's fewer, and then where there's not dots, there were no plants. So we either is in that northwest basin, for example, where it gets to a depth below where plants grow, or for some other reason plants didn't exist at that spot during the survey. But real quickly, when you map that, it gives you a good visual on where the plant growth is really occurring in the lake. Back in 2018, when this was done, 20 different species of aquatic plants were identified. That's a good number. The graph on the bottom there is one of the graphs out of the county-wide report that I told you about that compares all the lakes. So you can see that Ucil falls pretty much right in the middle there of the lakes we've done so far in terms of numbers of species. In general, the higher number of species is considered healthier. It's considered a more diverse system. With that, I would also say that when you look at the list of species that were identified there, in the far column there's a C value, and in simplest terms, the C value is relatively how sensitive that plant is. And so if it's a super sensitive plant, it's very intolerant of disturbance or bad water clarity or something, bad water quality, it gets a higher C value. And the values go up to 10. And so you can see you have a dwarf water milfoil there as a C value of 10. Anytime you get those high C values, that's an indication of a healthy system. We also see, we detected curly leaf pondweed there, which is an invasive species. So it gets a value of 0, and then everything in between. So the most abundant species was Cara, otherwise called muskgrass, at 45% of the sites that were sampled. This is a great thing to have in the lake. It's very effective at removing phosphorus from the water column. And it also is a plant that stays out of your way. It tends to carpet the bottom of the lake. And so not only does it not present a recreational nuisance usually, but it also helps protect the lake bed from the advancement of other species such as invasive species or something. So a good healthy Cara population is a good thing to have in general on your lake. And you can see here it's pretty widespread around the lake. Next was slender naiad, which is a common plant at a third of the sites, and then white stem pondweed, which is a slightly higher quality plant at about a quarter of the sites. That's where the slender naiad was located, and then the white stem pondweed. After that, although we found 20 species, they were a lot fewer and far between. So these were by far the most common ones. Curly leaf pondweed in 2018 was found at one location. You can see the green dot there on the north shore. So that was the one spot it was found. And again, kind of like, and Eurasian milfoil was not observed during the survey. And so, and again, back in summer of 2018. So of all plants to be mapping and monitoring, these two are probably very important to monitor change and where they're present over time. So here's the Eurasian milfoil, of course. This is actually a picture at the boat launch there at Ucil. Somebody had collected a bunch of it and draped it over the invasive species sign. That's Eurasian milfoil there hanging on the sign. But it's a increasingly common problem across the state. It's very aggressive, and but what we found is that in some lakes it doesn't really become a problem. It just kind of becomes one of the members of the community and is present. And then we've probably all heard stories where it just completely chokes everything out. It's really hard to predict how it's going to respond in various lakes. Definitely shallower lakes can be more susceptible, where you've got light penetrating to the bottom across the lake, makes basically anywhere possible for the milfoil to grow. But it's you know, used to, when we discovered milfoil, you went after it and you went after it hard, and they're starting to back off of that a little bit more, for a couple of reasons. Again, it doesn't always become a problem in every lake, and it's very expensive, these milfoil treatments. So it's a road that if you start down, may or may not solve the problem, and can be quite an issue when it comes to the bills. Also documented for this lake, in terms of invasives, is hybrid water milfoil. So the native northern water milfoil, we've found will hybridize with the invasive Eurasian water milfoil, creating a hybrid milfoil. And so this has been documented in the lake, which basically means a sample was taken and submitted to a lab. It's really the only way you can identify hybrid milfoil versus the Eurasian. But hybrid is even more aggressive than the Eurasian, and in terms of treatments, can have slightly different approaches to it. And so it's good to know that a sample of the milfoil was taken, and we have determined that hybrid is present there. In addition to that, we have the faucet snail and the Chinese mystery snail, invasive species here in Wisconsin. They're typically not as big of a problem. Again, there's really not much we do with them once you've got them. There's no effective eradication method for these snails. In a lot of lakes, they just become something that's present and they're not a big deal. So recreation, no wake on Ucil Lake, I believe, if that's correct. And the boat launch is owned by the town of Bagley, which is also important to know. A lot of boat launches in that area are owned by the Forest Service or managed by the Forest Service or various entities. And so it's actually a good thing to have your boat launch managed by the local group, particularly if it needs attention or something done. It's a lot closer to home, your resources for that. So just to wrap up here, a couple more questions a couple more comments off the survey. What would you like to see improved on Ucil Lake? Better fish management, stocking. So we covered that a little bit at the beginning. And then another comment to inform jet skiers to stay more than 50 feet from shore. And I think it's actually, they're supposed to be more like 100 or 200 feet from shore if you're creating a wake. Jet skiers are commonly more of an issue for that, just because they are smaller. I think they encroach on the shore a little bit more. Okay, Ucil's not a no wake lake. Oh, but they're, okay, no wake, okay. So that was wrong on there. And then any other comments, one person suggesting additional habitat and structure for fish, which I talked about. There's relatively little coarse woody structure in the shallow water around Ucil, and probably one of the most effective things you could do in terms of managing your fish population would be to improve that structure. You probably get much better results with that than you would even stocking, and definitely a lot cheaper. And then stay clear of the loons was another comment. So that's basically the information I have here. Here's some contact information for Ken, Dale, and myself. And so I want to answer questions or give anyone else a chance to comment here. But just to let you know that what I'll do is incorporate the information we have and kind of some suggestions and guidance on goals and objectives. And I'll wrap that into a draft that will email out to all of you guys. And then I will just wait to take comments back, whether they be individually or you look to get together. And I've had groups do different things. They get a hard copy and mark it up and mail it to me. Other times I just get a handful of comments via email. Feel free to call me and discuss something if you'd like. So we'll just send this draft through however many iterations it takes until it's something you guys are happy with and ready to submit to the DNR. But I would look for this process to take place in the coming weeks here.
Ryan,
Yes, sir.
this is Ken Delata, just so everyone knows. I just want to reiterate what he just said. This draft will go to all you people that are on this meeting tonight that I have emails for, and it will not be approved until you guys come to a consensus on what you want in it. There's been confusion on that in the past, but it will keep going back and forth with your comments until you guys are happy with it. So just wanted to point that out. And then we had one other comment in there. Ryan, I want to tell you, someone asked, noticed Westcott has a very high sodium levels.
Yeah. Okay.
That was the comment. So or question or comment, whatever.
Yes, that's true. And I don't have that data in front of me here, but I do know just from that present, we're doing Westcott next here, if anyone's interested in attending that. But they do have sodium is one of those contaminants that I talked about, and they do have elevated levels of those. So sodium could be coming from road salt. It can also be coming from septic systems, things like that. So if it's determined that basically what that just shows that it is receiving a pretty significant impact from something. And you're upstream of Westcott. So whatever's going on there is apparently not happening in yours. If Ucil was the high sodium, I'd be a little more concerned about Westcott, but they're down gradient view, so shouldn't be a problem for Ucil.
Okay, with that, we encourage anybody that has questions, if you want to unmute your microphone, jump right in and talk, or otherwise use the chat box.
Hi, this is Rob. There was conversation, or Tammy had put on there that some large portions of the shoreline for about the fish stick opportunities that would be like for cribs and stuff. What about working with you guys if we get volunteers together to make like fish cribs? I did that a couple of years in a row up in Vilas County on a lake, making cribs that are a little bit deeper instead of on the shoreline. Is that a possibility? Would that mean you need permits and things like that, or what would that take?
Yeah, this is Ken Delata. You do need a permit for that. You need one permit for the lake, and then you can add to it, I believe. I think it's a $50 permit. Fish cribs are not as effective overall for the lake as like fish sticks or the shoreline woody habitat. But everyone puts them in, and they're still, it does hold fish to an extent. At the county level here, we do have a cost sharing program for fish sticks. We don't do fish cribs just because, again, we think your shoreline woody habitat is more important than just being able to go over a crib and catch some fish and stuff. So,
Okay.
But we do have funding for that, and either way we can help assist you through the permit process or whatever. But if you are interested in shoreline, the tree drops and fish sticks, we pay 70% cost sharing on that, up to $2,500 on our end. You can go to, and usually the biggest problem with that is finding the live trees to create these with. I know in the past, Tammy's group and stuff have been good about helping anchor them and different things like that and picking spots. So if that's something you're interested in, by all means, contact us.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Tammy, do you have a comment on cribs versus fish sticks or anything like that?
Well, no, I agree with what Ken is saying about fish cribs. There are some lake groups that still do fish cribs. But if we had a choice, we would definitely encourage fish sticks, which are whole trees that are anchored along to the shoreline. And fish cribs are a bit more labor intensive. I don't know how well they would work in some places of this lake because the bottom is so soft. A lot of it might actually sink down into the muck. So that's something that might not work that well. And that may be an issue with some locations for fish sticks as well. There likely are some good spots where some trees could go that would not sink away into the muck. And that's one thing where we've done some fish stick projects on a bunch of lakes locally, and typically we would go out with, the landowner or who's ever in charge of the project, and we'd go out in a boat and have a stick and kind of poke down and see how deep is the water, what's the bottom substrate like, trying to figure out if we dropped it, if a tree went there, where would the top of the tree be. We can't have, they don't work well where it's really, really, really steep drop offs, and they don't work well where they're really shallow, like 2 feet of water, because most of your tree is outside of the water and not in the water where it's working for fish. So you kind of have to look for something in between, and something with a little bit more solid bottom tends to work better than a softer bottom. But I'm sure there are some spots we could that would work. And I was looking at an ownership map earlier, and there's 2 landowners that own a bulk of the shoreline. And one of the struggles we often see with fish sticks is getting multiple landowners to sign off and willing to have one cluster on their property, and they might only own 100 feet of shoreline or something like that. But if there's 1 or 2 landowners that own a huge chunk of land, and you can put in a good number of these trees along that property, it can work really well. So if there's Ken mentioned sometimes getting the whole trees is the issue. If there's any kind of a logging opportunity that anybody has going on their property, I know it's with the blowdowns that happened a year and a half ago, there was a lot of trees available in the area. But having whole trees that are cut, recently logged or cut, that can be brought to shore on the ice is kind of the ideal way to go. So yeah, that's something we would absolutely encourage. There's never too much wood that could be in a lake, in my opinion.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
We had one question I seen, and this is maybe for Brenda, seeing she hasn't got to talk much yet. It says, do you think the weed should be cut on the lake?
I guess it depends. Are they having or presenting a navigation difficulty? If you can live with them, then I would say no. But if you can't get from one spot to the other without the ability to drive around them, then maybe you could apply for a harvesting permit. Weeds are going to be on Ucil, especially in those shallower areas, just like with any sort of a vascular plant. Where the sun can reach, they're going to grow. And that's what we're seeing on Ucil in that southern lobe where it is fairly shallow. There's a lot of weeds over there, and there's nothing you can really do about it because the sun can reach. And same for the shallow areas on the other lobe. But there are definitely a lot of lakes that they are having issues with navigation, and we do issue them harvesting permits.
Tammy? Hello?
There it is.
Are you asking for kind of my feedback as well? Or do you have a different question?
Tom, you muted yourself.
Unmute. All right, am I, okay.
Now you're unmuted.
All right. Tammy, you were saying that our fish population on the lake is really, it appears to be healthy. So why would we want to be concerned about dropping more trees or fish cribs?
Well, you can never have too much habitat, I guess. And one of the things I always try to encourage lake groups to do is to spend money on habitat versus stocking fish. It's just a longer range, better investment. If you stock fish, you might see some returns for a year or two. If you do a habitat project, you're going to see returns for decades. And so that's just something to think about, more long term. The shoreline is moderately developed. So it's not a lake like Kelly Lake, which has 50 and 75-foot parcels and very, very little wood at all. But it can always use some attention, in my opinion. So just something to keep in mind.
Okay.
Yeah, particularly if there's something you wanted to change about the fishery. I think from a fish biologist perspective, it is a healthy fishery, but some people have asked about stocking and things like that. And I think that's just where we're suggesting that money might be better spent when habitat than stocking a particular type of fish.
All
But
right, thank you.
in general, it's good. It's in good shape. All right. Any other questions? Again, feel free to contact any of us, including Tammy or Brenda, if you have further questions or want to discuss something. What I don't know, which is a lot, I can usually find the answer for. So don't hesitate to call me, and just be looking for that draft plan to come your way, and take some time to look at it and comment on it. Even if it's just looks great, send it in. And also, if you can, take an opportunity to complete that survey and get your neighbor to take it as well. The more responses we have for that, the better kind of shape we can get on perspectives on the lake. So, and I see the link was put in the chat there, but it should also be in the email coming from Ken. And I'll include it when I send out the draft as well. And so if no one has any other questions, I appreciate everyone tuning in. That's what we know right now. And I wish you guys the best of luck with your lake. I remember in terms of those blue downs, I couldn't get in there a couple of times when I went up to sample because you couldn't get into the boat launch. So hopefully that's improved since then.
And if anyone here wants to hear about Westcott Lake, just email me quick and I will send you the link for that one if you want, if you really don't have anything to do tonight.
Oh, thanks a lot.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.